describe the technology. Every inventor believes that's the most important thing. Just give us enough to whet our appetite. We want to know the whole picture, the market size, the opportunity, competitive landscape, and in succinct terms, the purpose of the executive sum is just to whet the appetite. So you will be thrust out of that big, huge pile of all the other opportunities that are screaming for the investor's attention. And then you get the phone call and then the in-person meeting, and it's very much a progressive process. At each point you're selling and distinguishing yourself further. I'd like to add just a couple comments on a lot of us. I think it's a curse, but I'll call it a blessing of being both an entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur and an angel investor. A lot of us sitting out there have really novel technology and great ambition and a really unique opportunity that we're trying to commercialize or get funding for, but it's too early. Nobody here will write a check for it yet. So what do you do in those situations? And even it's too early for angel groups, perhaps. Well, in that case, first you've really got to show leadership and use the other kind of VC available to you. That's Visa card. You've got to have skin in the game. You've got to put some of your personal assets, whether it's your home equity mortgage on your repossessed home or whatever. You've got to have some skin in the game. It shows that you're not just kind of doing this as a hobby or as a lifestyle or a vanity play, but you're willing to suffer for your dream. The next thing you want is friends and family, or they say friends, family, and fools, but you've got to show that's another nice validation point, that you're not a criminal, that the people who know you best are willing to give you some money to help you pursue and hopefully build some wealth for themselves as well. And then moving up the scale would be individual angels. If structured institutional angels that are increasingly professionalizing and looking like mini VCs won't yet fund your deal, look for those individuals either that you can convince with your passion and your knowledge and your integrity that they're willing to bet on you, and almost in an emotional decision. You know, I like this person, I want to see what they can do. Or find those individuals, whether they're retired corporate types that know your space very well, or they're retired entrepreneurs that have done it before, whether in your space or out of your space, but have enough faith in you and you can convince them to write a small check.
You mentioned friends and family. That's one of the reasons why I became a lawyer. I actually had to crash my grandfather's 106th birthday party. I didn't have any relatives who I would have been able to go to for money. That's partially true. But in any event, maybe we can touch on what might be some of the don'ts. I mean, we've talked about raising money in the early stages, which is a lot of what people in Florida and I know other places struggle with, is raising funds from family, friends, individuals, accredited investors. But in going about doing that, some of the things that people ought to be thinking about to not do, situations that end up getting created that make it very difficult for the institutional investors to come in on a round. If someone might want to touch on that, perhaps.
You know, I think Steve said it well with one point, and that was, you know, don't get yourself in a position that you're panicking with that discussion you're going to have with the institutional investor. Make sure you've got a plan that is understandable, has got a good capitalization structure to it, with a plan, with a forward-looking plan in that regard, and have enough money to deal with the time frame that you think you're committed to be able to move it forward. And so that means if the way I would look at it, if the angel investor is going to do something early with an entrepreneur, then boy, the day they're signing the papers, they should be talking to an institutional VC about what this thing looks like, so they're whetting the institutional VC's appetite, and then the institutional VC could be tracking it along the way. But I think Steve kind of highlighted the do's in a good way that really contrast to that is what I wouldn't do.
The only thing I might, go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I was just going to add one old thing as it relates to the Friends, Families, and Fools. And certainly not a sophisticated group like New World, but as tempting as it is, if individuals are willing to give you money at a $20 million valuation, and people like us have said, no, we think you're worth $3 million, well, it will be tempting to take the $20 million valuation money. But in the long run, it's going to be very tough to ever get institutional money that doesn't make that dynamic upside down. So, you know, part of that is, as Art said, structure the capital structure appropriately going in, get good advice from your attorney or from your financial advisor about how to structure that. But We see it often, in fact, good businesses that don't know how to reconcile those two dynamics, and it can be very tough for you to raise money going forward.
Because at those high valuations, you're going to eventually run out of friends and family, and you're going to need to go to a deeper well. And if you've created a valuation issue, the valuation problem for the later funding, it does become quite messy, and you will have relatives who won't be speaking to you later.
I think it's a great point. I'd like to elaborate on that and then bring up one other don't. So when I've dealt with friends and family, initially for every one that I've done, I always give them like a no-brainer valuation. That's probably 5 times lower than what a comp would be if you went to a VC, because I don't want to worry about it. They're friends and family. I would give them a fair valuation. You don't need to validate it with comps. They don't care. Friends and family don't even ask. They trust you. That's the best way to start. So start low, don't start high. Don'ts, as a way of don'ts, I would say don't get one investor, particularly one angel. Not an angel group, but you don't want one guy to be your partner. I wouldn't recommend that. That'd be something, it makes it difficult to do a lot of what you want to do because they tend to want a lot of control. The flip side is don't get too many angel investors, because these guys don't want to deal with 30 different angels or whatever it is. So those are your points.
Reese?
Yeah, no, I'm just nodding my head here. That's, there's one of the cardinal sins is gumming up your capital structure. I think we've alluded to it a few times, but what it means is having scores of investors. And some entrepreneurs just, they raise a little tiny bit of money. Oh, I got the check in. Okay, I'm going to do more science. Then I'll raise a little more money and do a little more science. But, sophisticated VCs, like the people to my right here, really like a fewer number of investors, not a greater number. It simplifies things, and at a certain point, you get enough. Actually, you can mess up from a securities regulation perspective. What's the number? Is it 160, 120?
Well, it depends on, I don't get into
Okay.
SEC metrics, but you can have an unlimited number of accredited investors, but non-accredited, you can't have more than 35, or you run into problems under a particular regulation. One other thing to mention is that the institutional investors all have great memories, so you really want to work out the kinks as best as you can in your business plan, because you may go to them early on, and although they may not invest right away, if they're interested and intrigued, they'll keep in touch with you, and they'll want to know that if you said you were going to be in 6 months at point X, it's a really good idea to be there, because they will lose interest really fast if you don't do what you say you're going to be doing. And that's really critical. So I know it was mentioned in the panel that you had to work out in advance, speak to advisors, get other people to help you out and to react to the plan before you go to the money people, because you really need to take that on the road before you go to Broadway and speak to these people, so that what you tell them is more likely than not going to happen. Because if it doesn't, that's the quickest way to lose interest. I know one situation I had with Kathy where it was a client, and she mentioned, well, they said he was going to do X, Y, and Z, and it didn't happen several times. That's one way for an institutional investor to lose interest in following a company. Yes, Gary. Is there a mic?
But what Art said was intriguing a while back, but to follow up on that, I still get involved with investment analysis and looking at lots of business plans myself, and that always ends up in a technology forecast. So the biomarker example is a good one, and also I finished one recently in the nanotechnology area, and there's issues there where people might not want to start companies in that area because the patents may expire. Or you actually have sales. And then the same is true, and what the FDA said, I guess about 4 days ago, about the tortuous path that may be involved with stem cell approval is also something that comes to bear on choosing where you may or may not want to invest.